In this video, we're going to look at voicing to picture. Just when you thought speaking a script aloud without sounding as if you're reading it wasn't difficult enough, what happens when you actually have to time that with existing media? Dubbing and ADR, where you're actually timing down to the millisecond on someone else's mouth on screen, are whole art forms unto themselves. I'm talking about synchronizing in corporate, commercial or narration projects. Quite often in live directed sessions where you need to synchronize as well, you'll actually have the text of the voiceover on the screen as a surtitle, so that you're reading it as you're seeing the images. And this approach has pros, but also some cons. The pros are quite obvious. You'll know if it fits because you'll be keeping in time or you won't be. You'll get a sense of the tone and the rhythm changes required as you go along, and your delivery will also be naturally informed by the imagery that you're seeing. But the cons could be quite substantial as well. Firstly, you can't annotate the script at all because it's actually on the image. You have the added pressure and anxiety of knowing that if you make a mistake, everything needs to stop, go back a couple of lines, and then resume again. And the flip side of the pro point that the imagery can affect your delivery is that, well, the imagery can affect your delivery, sometimes not always helpfully. Now, to a certain extent, you need to be comfortable with any and every type of approach in a session because they'll all vary in some way to another, and you can't rely on just one way of doing things. Especially for shorter commercial reads where the odd second or 2 seconds need to be shaved, then you can only really cultivate that internal clock through practice, and more practice. But when you're self-directing, as I often find myself doing with corporate and narration projects, you need to have your own approach as well. The first thing I'd recommend is soaking it all in. Rather than rushing to try and get into performance mode and saying the text out loud, actually watch the media that's been sent to you and read along with it as well, but get a vibe of the whole project before attempting to actually jump in there first. Only then move on to stage 2, lightly talking through as you're watching the video. From doing this, you'll get a natural sense where some of the script breaks up, where there'll be certain tonal inflections and changes, and also when there are useful times to play against an edit. For example, if there's a section that needs to run on despite there being lots of different image changes, and when that doesn't apply as well. You have the opportunity to pinpoint any particular issues here as well, because you're not really focusing on the final performance yet. So for example, one section might require you to put a little bit of extra air in between the words in order to be able to match up with what the imagery is doing, and another time you might have to ignore some of the punctuation and run on a sentence that you would normally break up. This is also a really useful stage to mark up any places where you may want to do alternate reads instead. Sometimes a rhythm hasn't really been thought of in terms of vocal delivery in the composition of the final thing, so being able to provide options is a useful way out of that, rather than just boxing yourself into one decision only. Also, use these initial readings as an opportunity to get the tempo into your body, actually physically manifest it in some way. I normally use my hand or my arm, and as soon as I've kind of set a particular speed, it's really helpful for me to continue going on with that so I remain consistent. Quite often what we'll do is we'll start at a particular speed, and then as we warm up with the words and get more fluent, that's when we have a tendency to get more passionate and then speed up as a result. If you need to maintain an early tempo all the way through the piece so it's consistent, then make sure that you always have that physical measure going as well. The most important aspect here is to make sure that obviously you know exactly what you're saying and you understand all terminology and how to pronounce words, but also what the emotional connection and the journey through the piece is, so that you've marked the structure accordingly and you've prioritized that before thinking about the technical side. The next thing to do is focus on articulation, and obviously we all have our own kind of ways of warming up, or not, before we record, but one thing that I always recommend doing is getting a pen or a pencil, putting it in your mouth, and then reading all of the text through that way. If you do that through the entire text, and then you take the pen out of your mouth, then you'll feel a lot more articulate and you'll have started embedding the words into your actual muscle memory. So do that as a minimum once so you feel confident about being able to speak it out loud. When it comes to the actual recording, obviously different people work in different ways. Generally, I try to want to maintain a flow as much as possible, so I won't work section by section and editing as I go. That's not really my approach. However, obviously for long form projects, when you're also synchronizing, you need to be able to check in, make sure that you're not making any mistakes, so you're not wasting time as well. So there's an element of balance to that. One thing I would recommend though is listening to the music if they supply it, if that's possible. What I use is some in-ear headphones that are noise cancelling, and then over the top of them I'll have my studio monitors as well, so I can hear the music, and that will obviously inform my read, both in terms of the inflection and the energy I give it, but also in terms of the tempo. Again, it's important to have appreciated how the project hangs together as a whole before you started actually articulating the word, because the soundtrack will likely give you some cues about certain changes in tone at various different stages, and you need to be able to be responsive to that and mark those as a result as well. And throughout the recording process when self-directing, when in doubt, record an alternate. It's much easier to record an alternate of a line, either in terms of speed, tempo, pronunciation, or if you want to change something grammatically, when you're in the session, as opposed to revisiting it a few hours later and then attempting to do the same pickup when it's not been fully inhabited in the same way. Once you've completed a full take and edited it together, then it really is your responsibility to match it with the sound and the imagery and see how it all looks, if there are any other issues, so that you can go in and pick them up rather than leave that to the client. So in conclusion, you have to be good at all approaches, not just have one way of doing things. If you're recording live, then you have to find ways of dealing with the added anxiety that comes with that, knowing that things are going to stop and start depending on the mistakes that you do. And one way I'd say that helps to reduce the anxiety is to make sure that you concentrate on breathing, and deep breathing especially between takes, giving yourself enough time rather than rushing into takes all the way through. You should annotate the script so you know exactly where those changes in tone, tempo and delivery are. Resist the temptation to rush into the recording side and make sure to appreciate the project as a whole. See how all of the different media that you're getting, both visually and aurally, informs your performance naturally, and get the sense of the voiceover being a voice under, serving those images rather than dominating over them. When possible, use external stimuli, like a physical action to help you with the tempo, or the music that's actually going to be used to help you with the mood and inflection and emotional connection. And when in doubt, if you're not quite certain how a piece is supposed to work, give an alternate read, or two, at most three. And perhaps most importantly of all, if it doesn't fit, don't force it. If you think you're ever compromising your delivery in a particular section because the images, the timings, and the words don't quite mesh together, then flag that up with the client rather than trying to make it work. I hope this video has been of some help to you, and if you have any tips yourself about how to work with projects that require timing or synchronization, then please do leave them in the comments below. Please do like, subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you next time.